Now excited to be joined by a very special guest. It is Duke coach Manny Diaz. Manny, we're recording this before the Final Four, but this interview is going to come out after the Final Four. So I'll just instead ask you this. How awesome was the championship parade?
It's been fun to watch a group of guys, especially as young as they are, to play as hard and be unselfish and dedicated to defense. As a defensive guy, got to tip my hat to that.
I know you can hoop a bit. Have you played pickup hoops with John Shire? Because I'll just say from personal experience, as someone who grew up in the suburbs of Chicago and witnessed his own brother allow 32 points to that guy in a playoff game, I would advise against any scenario in which you could be against him.
Oh, not on the court with John. Luckily or unluckily, our football off seasons and our basketball off seasons don't really match really well for recreational reasons. So when the football group gets into Cameron, it's normally a slugfest. I don't think John would even want to get into that game.
Yeah, as it should be. That's the way that football players should be playing hoops. Let's talk about your team. 9 wins in year one is really no small feat in the portal era, especially with all the roster turnover that a lot of these teams have to endure. You led Duke to its first ever win against your alma mater, Florida State. You've been doing this for almost 3 decades now. I know it didn't end the way that you wanted, but how rewarding of a season was this for you, just in your entire, comparison to your entire career?
It was as rewarding as any season I've ever had. I had maybe as much fun coaching that team as I've ever had. Just you begin to learn the superpower of the guys here at Duke, what makes them special. Um, and they want to be coached, and they want to be driven. They want to understand the ins and outs. They want to know the details, and they want to be held accountable. And all those things I think now um, more than ever are really important in this portal era where you end up running against some teams that play like a bunch of strangers or independent contractors. And I felt like we had a really good team. And even the way that it ended didn't bother me. You never like getting beat, but it was a great lesson in terms of, if our next step of getting, Ole Miss by every metric was a playoff team, really shouldn't have had the losses that they had. Their roster was a playoff roster. And so to go against them and to see where we're not quite there yet was a good lesson for us. We don't shy from that. We learn from that.
Really hard for us in the media to kind of figure out year one coaches because everybody inherits a different situation. The situation you inherited from Mike Elko, did that give you a head start because of what he was able to do in a short matter of time? Or is that kind of out the window with how quickly you look at the portal and you see some of the pieces that you obviously have to be able to replace? Like what was that dynamic like in year one, knowing that he did a lot of really good things during his 2 years in Durham?
Probably both, right? I mean, I think one at least set the expectation that you could win, and there was an expectation to win. I think the key is that David Feely, our strength coach, staying. So I really think he was the secret sauce to the success of both programs. But we also inherited a team that lost a lot of older players. Our quarterback had gone to Notre Dame. Many of our top line guys had transferred out to school. So, when we got here in that first December, the narrative was really who had left, and we had to shift it into who was here and who had stayed, and the belief that we would win with those who had stayed because we'd been picked clean pretty good.
Malik Murphy, him entering the portal after the year that you guys had, it surprised a lot of people because he was a really solid player. And, I think after coming over from Texas, that was one of those areas that you talk about like replacing, and you guys hit on that. You guys are then very quickly able to land Darian Mensah out of the portal, who was pretty coveted after the year that he had at Tulane as a freshman. From your perspective, what kind of went into that whole process?
Well, one, we're really thankful for Malik in terms of coming here at that time in December when there was a lot of uncertainty with Duke, and we don't win 9 games without him, without a doubt. But things move fast now, as you mentioned in the portal. Hopefully, the calendar changes. That's a whole nother conversation where we can come to grips more. We're not dealing with this type of stuff in December. Um, but when Darian Mensah, became available, and you do your quick eval and find out what type of player he is, just felt like it'd be a great match for us here at Duke. And since he's been on our campus, that's absolutely proven to be the case.
How long is the eval with that when you're like, look, this is a huge decision that we've got to make, and this guy could make or break our season. We're not talking about, hey, maybe this is going to impact one win. No, this could determine, are we talking 4 or 5 wins? Are we talking like 8, 9 wins?
Yeah.
What's that eval process like for you, and how much, prep do you have to do just to be able to figure out if this guy's right?
It's huge. You just got to get through all the film, and you're going to watch the good parts first, and then you got to watch the games and see the not as good parts um, and get an idea of what it is that you're looking for, his production for being a first year starter was uncanny. But then, maybe some things that we were lacking with the ability to create, to extend plays, keep eyes down the field, and make us, make the defense defend two plays, I thought would give us an element that we really didn't have.
My breakdown of him was I thought he would have been really a nice fit at a lot of different places. And, you look at freshmen and are they going to break down when pressure kind of, gets in their face? What are the throws that they're making under pressure? And he really did a lot of things that you wouldn't expect of a true freshman. And maybe, that's part of the eval moving forward is saying like, hey, we got to let it rip in some of these instances as well. What was the thing that you saw from him on film that made you say, that's our guy? Was it like, is there a specific throw even that kind of stands out that made you think this guy's going to look really good in a Duke uniform?
I don't know about one particular play. I mean, certainly you watch him very early in his career get, thrown in there at Norman, against Oklahoma. But I'm with you. To me, it was just when it's not there, right? I'm a defensive guy. I've spent my whole career getting quarterbacks off the first look, right? And trying to take away what they want to do and see what they do after that. And most college quarterbacks, once you do that, their level of play goes way, way down. And Darian seemed the guy that, despite his young age, you could never sort of rattle, stay poised, kept his eyes down the field, and could either scramble for first downs or buy time to throw for first downs. And in this era, that's so crucial because otherwise you almost be, perfect in your play calling and your ball placement if you don't have that ability.
Is there anybody that comes to mind as a comp for him? I don't know if you're big on comps. Nick Saban. Whenever I made the mistake one time of throwing out a comp to him, and he just like immediately, no, we don't compare guys to somebody else. So feel free to shoot that down. But is there somebody that kind of comes to mind with Mensah?
Yeah, I'm the same way. I don't want to get into all that. But the one other part that I'll mention is just in terms of, then when we found out that there was an interest, which I do think speaks to the power of Duke and what, we were able to put on film last year in terms of a style of play, the total package of what we, offer on campus and what you can do here from a football standpoint. And then we got to learn who Darian was, the person, and we tracked a unique guy here at Duke, right? And we really felt like he would fit in with our locker room, and that's exactly what has been proven to be true.
What should we be doing with spring as it relates to the calendar, with spring football, with the portal, with all this stuff, spring games? Like, how should we be going about this? Well, if you were, sitting here with the power as commissioner of college football, position that'll never really exist, but if you had that kind of power, what would you do?
Yeah, I've been sort of stumbling for this the last couple of years. We don't have to invent it. I mean, the NFL's already figured it out, right? If you make spring the time for player movement and then make, early summer the time for development, right? The calendar's already been laid out, right? They don't have practices before the draft. They don't have practices before free agency, and so our whole issue is the angst of getting the transfers to get there mid-year, which by the way creates a non-level playing field because people start school at different times in January. People have different drop add dates, what I mean, in terms of when they can admit a player into school. So you're creating an unlevel playing field for this whole idea to get there for these 15 practices. And as I mentioned a year ago, we won 9 games, and our 15 practices a year ago, we only had 5 offensive linemen, right? I mean, a third of our starters last year weren't on our campus for spring. So what's the point of spring? I mean, why don't we go to the OTA minicamp schedule in May after you get everybody here? I don't think there's anything wrong with having a student athlete with the movement that they are allowed now to have to stay for a fall and a spring at whatever school they're at. I just don't think that's a bad thing academically. I don't think it's bad for anybody. And it just takes the angst. It's hard on these admission departments to get these guys admitted in short order at the turn. And it just moves the movement into a more sensible time of year. Again, much like the NFL does.
Would the portal be 9 days then? Because that's what it's set for right now for the spring, April
But
16th, 25th.
right, but everybody's like that doesn't mean anything. The portal can
Yeah.
be 9 minutes. Like, right, like first of all, everybody's whether you're going in or you're not going in. So there's nothing happening on the seventh or eighth day. And until we get something going on with the players usually are making that decision before it opens anyhow. So I think there's a myth that the length of portal, I think we initially it was a 45-day window and then turned to 30 and then went to 15. Like I said, it could be 9 minutes and you would still have the same movement as we have now.
I do want to get your perspective on your journey into coaching because it's very unique. You were working alongside friend of the show, Ryan McGee, as a production assistant at ESPN. You didn't play college football, but you decide one day, I'm going to leave Bristol. I'm going to go become a college football coach. And I got to imagine there were at least one of those aha moments for you. What was that place in time in which you said, I think I can do this?
After I made the move, you mean,
Yeah,
or,
maybe what kind of prompts a move like that? Because if you, it's one thing if you were a player in college or something like that, you know, you're doing the office thing, you're like, all right, I think I got some more football in me. But to be in that spot where you're cutting up highlights and you're doing something that is definitely outside of that typical realm. But what was there a moment when you're at ESPN and you're like, I think my calling is to be a college football coach?
at the end of the 96 NFL season, January of 97, the Super Bowl was in New Orleans. It was um, Brett Favre and the Green Bay Packers against the New England Patriots, who at that time were coached by Bill Parcells. And we spent a week down there prepping for the game. And I went along. Tom Jackson, the old Broncos linebacker, been on ESPN forever, had a good relationship with Parcells. And we were doing an interview, and I went along for the interview, and I was sitting in the room. And on one side, you see a man who's, just coached this franchise to a Super Bowl, and obviously it had already won one with New York. And on the other side, you have Tom Jackson and the ESPN producer and the ESPN on air and all these other ESPN people. And that was kind of the pivotal moment where you get to look at both sides of the room. And as the interview was going on, my brain was not, thinking as a journalist, like, wow, I wonder what the next question I'd ask Bill Parcells was. I was enamored with what Bill Parcells was saying and wanted to, um, I just found my mind being pulled to that side of the room as opposed. So it was a really weird, when you talk about an aha moment, it was quite a moment, to see two people, right? If you're at ESPN interviewing the Super Bowl, participant head coach, you've made it, like, right. When you made it, you're at the top of your food chain. And certainly if you're coaching the NFL at the Super Bowl, you've done the same. So you see these two sort of professions meet at the top of the mountain. And there's only one thing I want to do. And from that point on, it was all about, okay, how do I go be that? It wasn't about being a college head coach. I just knew I just had to get on that path. At that moment, I just felt like I was on the wrong path.
How much did you know about football at that point? From a an X's and O's standpoint, was that something that you really had to pick up on and get those reps, or were you like pretty well versed in it when you were even in high school?
I knew tons. I know so much I didn't realize what I didn't know, right? um, I knew enough to be dangerous, but and luckily, again, when I was at ESPN, I mentioned Tom Jackson. Yeah, I was really pivotal with Sterling Sharp. I'm really fired up going to the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Sterling was there at that time, and we would talk ball at all the times. And like I said, looking back now, it's comical at the infinite amount of that I actually did know, but you just knew enough to make yourself useful. And then look, from that point on, if you're getting into any profession, it's going to be about your work ethic, right? Like FedEx is not going to hire somebody at the entry level to try to give them an idea on how to ship boxes. Like, right, FedEx has kind of figured that out, right? They just want someone that's dependable and works hard. And then, one day, they might ask you your opinion. And that's really what ended up being true, whether I was working in TV or working in football, right? The first thing was, can you just be dependable when we give you small jobs? And then the more small jobs you do well, then we'll give you bigger jobs. And that's really just, all that's happened in the last 25 or so years.
I always think that if anybody gets to a place of success, there's at least one person along the way that gave them a job that they probably weren't qualified for. At some point, I imagine you had an experience like that where you thought, I just got a job that there were probably more qualified candidates than me. Who was the person that gave you that opportunity?
Yeah, really, for me, it's Chuck Amato. Chuck was the assistant head coach at Florida State under Bobby Bowden, and he really handled the day to day. And after I volunteered there for a year, a job came open on defense. It was called the defensive cinematographer role. And, back then there were so few jobs. I mean, there was Coach Bowden, 9 on the field coaches. There were 2 GAs and 2 cinematographers. That's the whole staff. There were 14 people on the coaching staff. Now you've got, college staffs that have, 50, 60, 70 people. There was 14. And so one of those 14 jobs came open. You can only imagine how many people would want to be one of 14 at Florida State in the late 90s when they were just rolling. Um, and for me, again, how did I get it? Because I had been walking the hallways and they didn't want to, deal with a bunch of resumes, and they seemed like I was, dependable and not a, ex murderer. And so it's really just how I got it. So was I qualified to get it? depends on what certainly from a football standpoint, there have been a million that would have been more, but in terms of a dependability standpoint, I had the ability to prove that.
I know you've gotten a million better jobs since then, but defensive cinematographer is the single best title you've had at any time. That's awesome.
Yeah, it never graced a business card, but I was proud of it at the time. So
I would still have that at the top of the resume. Defensive cinematographer at one point. That's absolutely awesome. I'll give you the option here. Favorite story from your experience, either with Dan Mullen or Mark Richt?
oh gosh, so I've been so lucky to work with so many phenomenal head coaches, and Dan and Mark have been two great ones. Um, Dan Dan came at a great time in my life because I had worked in the Florida State Bobby Bowden model for really the first 12 or 13 years of my career. That had been Coach Bowden, Amato at NC State, and then Rick Stockstill at Middle Tennessee for 4 years. Really, all descendants of Coach Bowden. And then you jump into it with Dan Mullen, and Dan was straight 2 years removed from Urban Meyer, and so it was like, I mean, you want to talk about whiplash from one extreme to another. And the one funny Dan Mullen story I'll tell you is it was our first spring game, and spring games were talk about spring football and whatnot. Spring games were a very sensitive topic at Mississippi State because I think one of them a year, couple two before, maybe when Kroom was head coach, ended 0-0. Right. And the one thing fans don't want is they don't want to see a 0-0 spring game. Now, the year that we won the Natty at Florida State in '99, that spring game final score was 3-0. And the fans did boo us off the field. So but they won 0-0. So there was one rule that we only had four defenses we could call. And by the way, if he kind of wanted a complimentary defense to a good play call, you would kind of get the wink like, hey, call defense number two. But the one rule is that on field goal block, there was no rush, right? So lo and behold, like the first drive, the offense drives down the field, right? And it's a field goal, not of any great length, right? And so we're like, hey, there's no rush. And I think Fletcher Cox was one of our defensive tackles. Josh Boyd was the other one. And so we're like, literally just stand there, right? So the ball snapped, and this is on ESPN something, right? ESPN2, ESPN who knows what. The ball snapped, hold goes down, the guy kicks. And one of the D-tackles, might have been Fletcher for all I know, just does this. I mean, no one rushes. They're just literally just standing there. And he just does this and puts his hand up, right? Doink, and the ball hits it, right? Dan Mullen got nose to nose with me, and of all the words that I could think of that were said, none were missed. Every word that you could imagine, all were said. It was phenomenal. And all I'm thinking is, what have I gotten myself into? And so like the next play, so we actually put the ball back down to kick it again. And it was like, guys, like hands on your knee. It was so comical. So yeah, that was a great introduction to my first spring there at Mississippi State.
Oh gosh, yeah, that'll get the heart rate pumping real quick on a job like that. Oh
That's
gosh.
right.
What did you take away from your exit at Miami? What's the thing that kind of sticks with you from that experience?
There was such learning. I mean, just from year one, and all the mistakes you make your first year as a head coach, because there's just nothing, you think you have an idea of what it's like and you just don't, right? You're always trying to learn how to get your staff as good as you can get it. Year two, you think you've made some adjustments and you've done some things right. Oh, bang, here comes COVID, right? So that's an education, and whatever you think every day, you're not going to have it. And that team actually ended up being, won 7 games in the ACC, right? And had we had played our, schedule that was laid out before the season, I'm fairly certain that's a 10-win football team. But you don't, and you don't finish that year very well. And then you go into year 3 and you're under pressure. And then our starting quarterback gets hurt in the first month, and our 2 of our top 3 running backs, and you're really, really up against it. We miss a 20-something yard field goal off the post to lose our ACC opener. So you're really up against it. But then to have, a team with all that negativity around it to win 5 out of its last 6, and the one at law that you lose on a 4th and 14. What you really see is you saw that you had something good going. You had the hearts and minds of the players captured. You had a team that continued to fight hard for each other. So you had a sense that if you had the opportunity to do it again, you knew better what to expect, right? And you knew more how to do it, but you also had some proven. My 3 years in Miami, we had the second most wins in the ACC in that time frame. So in no way did we accomplish what we should have accomplished, and I'm ultimately accountable for all that. But you also had the idea that, you know what, I can do this thing. But then last thing I'll say on that, but then you had to be really aware of where you would attempt to do it again. Because you realize that these jobs, and that you get, there's a lot more to it than just who they stick in the head coach seat. There's a lot of things around you that either prime you for success or the opposite. And you've got to have great alignment. You got to have a place of shared values, and you have to have a place where the support matches the expectations. Because if the expectations are greater than the support, there's always going to be angst. And there's a lot of that going around in the sport right now.
I think a lot of people pointed that right after that happened at Miami too, and that alignment just wasn't necessarily where it needed to be, and something that there's lessons to be learned across college football. I know you got to run, you got a million things going on. I want to get you out of here with some rapid fire, just 5 questions. First thing that comes to mind. Does that work for you? All right, first one. What is your go-to in-flight entertainment?
Oh gosh, you know what? Silly video games. My son's got me like into all like see like the retro. There's like every sport, like retro soccer, golf, baseball, whatever. Just just mindless. Just sit there and just plug away at the you know taking a Premier League team to the title, something like that. So yep, just good way to kill the time.
I like that. How many cups of coffee per day are you at right now?
I am a usually 2 or 3 before the morning, and then that's the last caffeine I have for the rest of the day.
That's low. That's pretty low for a college ball coach. That's definitely on the lower
Yeah,
end.
I would worry. One, I wouldn't sleep if I had it after lunch, and I don't need much more energy juice than that.
True. What's the best advice you've ever received in your coaching career?
Oh gosh, I think you have to be authentic to yourself. I'll go back to Sterling. Even when I was at ESPN, he would say it's an insecure profession because it's filled with insecure people. And more often than not, I think it's a book title, Ryan Holiday. The ego is the enemy, right? It is, and the ego is what gets in the way of most coaches from, and we all fight that battle. And at some point you're going to go through it. If you think you haven't gone through it, it's coming. And if you haven't think you've gone through it, you probably did, and you're not aware of it. But yeah, I think those two things are vastly crucial.
Who's the single most difficult player that you've ever had to game plan against?
The first one that comes to mind is RG3. At that time, the Baylor offense and the choice passing game was new, and they had guys that ran 4-4, 4-3 at all three receiver positions, and then had a 245-pound back that could run downhill behind a very strong offensive line. And if you managed to cover all those guys, then you had to deal with his feet, as a scrambler and a quarterback runner. So anytime the quarterback can run, it obviously creates another issue for the defense. But that element of, the ability to throw the deep ball to elite receivers on the outside and then to extend plays with your legs, that was really, really difficult offense to stop. There's been other great quarterbacks that we've gone against, but he just, in terms of all the things that he could, throw at you, was really problematic.
I thought for sure Cam was going to be the response there.
No, it's actually funny. As I was finishing up, Cam Ward had a very similar. The game has changed a little bit. You know what I mean? But yeah, certainly he was as good as advertised this year, and about to be picked very soon.
Both Cam Ward, Cam Newton. Yeah, same thing. Same sort of deal with them.
Oh, Cam Newton.
Yeah, that's who I was originally thinking of, Mississippi State.
It's funny. We held Cam Newton to like 17. We played him really, really well that year. The rule with Cam Newton was you weren't allowed to look at him during pregame warmups because your players would be so discouraged. The guy looked literally like a Greek god. It was insane.
I asked this because Ryan McGee made me aware of it. He grew up in North Carolina. He was told by SEC people that North Carolina wasn't in the South. Is North Carolina in the South?
Who said that? SEC people?
Ryan McGee was told that by SEC people because he's like, I'm from North Carolina. And they're like, you're not from the South. And he's like, then why do I talk like this?
No, I think, well, if Ryan McGee would be, he'd be the first person as Exhibit A, as a Southerner, right? Therefore, North Carolina must be in the South. And if you think about NASCAR and its roots here in this state, and then if you just go north and ask anybody if North Carolina's in the South, you're going to get a definitive yes. So I'm gonna go with a strong yes on that one.
Agreed. Manny, really appreciate it. Always been a fan. Wish you the best of luck this season.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.